Ladies and gentlemen, anytime we see top grandmasters going head-to-head, they are usually playing under a sanctioned body. They are usually playing classical, rapid, or blitz, one of the standard time controls. It's all rated. There are rules and regulations. They're wearing beautiful suits. There's good lighting. Their sponsors are on display. There's air conditioning. But today, in the final rest day of the Candidates Tournament, July 2nd, 2022, Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri played in a central park in Spain. Magnus was playing all sorts of spectators. I believe Anish was as well. And I used the footage of Anna CRAMLING. She's got a Twitch and YouTube channel as well. She was there live streaming the whole thing. And in this video, I'm going to show you two games that they played head to head. And at the end, we'll even see a little clip of a crazy scramble that they had. Seems like the time control they played was maybe 2 minutes per person, maybe 3 minutes per person. But folks, you already know, if Magnus Carlsen is involved, it's going to be a YouTube video on the GothamChess YouTube channel. And if Magnus is playing a guy like Anish, I mean, oh my goodness. It's like I hit the jackpot. Let's jump into the video. All right, in our first game from the park in Spain, Magnus gets the white pieces versus Anish and opens with e4. It wouldn't be a game between two GMs if we didn't have a Sicilian defense. I mean, what are you going to do, right? You gotta give the fans a little bit of excitement. Now, I don't expect Magnus to bust out all of his knowledge in the open Sicilian, so instead he plays knight c3, which is potentially going for a closed Sicilian, or he goes for the Grand Prix attack, right? He goes for knight c3, f4 as well, taking the center with his e and f pawns, and you know, white is just going to play potentially bishop to b5 here, potentially bishop c4. Oftentimes when you castle, your rook has a little bit more space. We have g6, knight f3, bishop g7, and already the first weird move. And this is the good thing about getting two really good players, especially Magnus. No, like they're both extremely good. What I mean by that is Magnus will try to play some goofy openings all the time. He just will, and trust me, it's going to happen in the second game as well. Magnus here doesn't develop a bishop, doesn't do anything, plays a3 and b4. And actually, it's not that bad. The idea of this is that it's a really delayed wing gambit. Like, in the Sicilian, you can play the wing gambit immediately. You can also play this. This is one of my favorite lines against the Sicilian defense. It's a really goofy and absurd variation. But doing it a little bit later, right, it makes the position a little bit more set in stone already. Black has some weaknesses. And black really can't just go gobbling, because what will happen here is white has ideas like knight b5, not right away, you don't want to lose the rook, but you know, bishop a3, for example, then when this goes back, then knight b5 is actually extremely strong. Because if the bishop takes the rook, you have this, but you also have a check on the king, and then a discovered check right after that. So it's really bad news. Black will probably just be losing this queen. But Anish plays b6, and Magnus goes, literally. He was like, solid. You know, he takes, actually he said boring. He did not say solid, he said boring. And then he plays e5. This is very aggressive. That is not, I just misclicked that. My God, this is a goofy video. The idea of this move is to take control of those dark squares and create an entry and a transfer point like this for the knight. So for example, this is what white wants. White will land the knight on d6 and have a completely winning position. So Anish immediately begins fighting back with the move d6. Magnus attacks the knight, which is now completely loose. The knight is defended by the other knight, and now knight e4. Now here, black plays pawn takes on e5, and if white here responds with something like f takes e5, the knight cannot capture, and so obviously black will just castle and be very okay. Instead of that, Magnus makes the position really goofy and plays the move knight takes e5, and apparently he's completely lost. I mean, apparently this is like a really bad position, but there's a lot of tricks and traps. He's only completely lost if black plays queen to d4, which actually is straight up a fork. And then, I don't know, maybe Magnus had more tricks here. Like, of course he can retreat, but maybe he had more tricks. But after queen c7, queen f3, now the position is even more drastically lost if black castles. Now, castling looks impossible because it looks like there is, for example, bishop c6, knight c6, knight c6. You cannot take because of discovered check and the queen is lost. But after that exchange were to happen, for example, knight takes c6, there is a hanging rook. So actually, castling would have been totally okay here for Anish, but instead of that, he takes, and now Magnus is actually completely winning because of all of these dark squared weaknesses. Anish grabs the pawn on e5 here, and seeing that his rook is under attack, Magnus castles and just completely gives away the rook. The point is that the rook cannot be taken. If it were to be taken, bishop c6 comes in, knight c6, queen f7, king d8, and the king is just hunted. Like, I mean, The engine here gives this move, locking away the queen. I don't know what human plays the move c3 in this position, but like that's the general idea. You know, queen a1, you have queen f7 coming. Just looks really, really dangerous for black. But actually, there is a move instead of castling that is +6, and it wins on the spot, and Anish saw it right after because he actually brought it up to Magnus. There is a move here, d4, an incredible move, a tempo-winning move to get the bishop into the game. And so, for example, if queen takes d4 were to be played here, then apparently c3 and the queen's got nowhere to go. c3 and the queen has nowhere to go. For example, if you just go right back to where you were, I get my bishop out, and anywhere you move the queen, you lose it. Like, there's a fork. And if you go all the way back to g7, that's adorable, but then I go here, and you go here, and then here I have this absolute dynamite strike, bishop h6, with queen f7 mate to follow, right? Deflecting the queen. So, brutal move, d4. You can't take with a knight. If you take with a pawn, you meet the same fate, actually, because if takes, there is a fork. So, d4, crushing move, but because we have castles, Anish lashes out with his f-pawn. Magnus sacrifices his knight, queen f6, bishop c6, it's a fork, but the king moves, and the rook is still hanging. At the end of all this, it looks like Magnus can gobble on a8, but he can't. The rook is still hanging. So what does he do? He has to move his rook out of the way, knight c6, queen c6, and Anish, for what it's worth, has no development at all. No development at all. None of those pieces have moved. It's in 18 turns, right? We have bishop b2 on the way. This is bad news. So Anish has to seize control of the game himself. What does he do here? He has only one way. Check. Now the tables have turned. Now white is responding to black's threats. Now black goes here, defending the rook with the other rook and attacking the queen. The queen has to... Oh, the queen doesn't have to move. The initiative continues, pinning the bishop to the king. Anish defends. Now Anish unpins his king. Now Anish removes the rook. Sorry, the queen. He removes the rook from the corner, but he kicks the queen out. And a couple of moves later, we actually have an exchange, and it looks like Anish is in good shape. He's going to trade the rooks. He's going to go here. We have opposite colored bishops, and Magnus here, a little bit exasperated, was like, this is where he was like, oh my god, you're too solid, But it's Magnus, all right? He's going to keep rooks on the board, and he has a very nice situation here as the black king is completely cut off on the 7th rank, and all the squares are exposed. Bishop e5, and this king will reach safety in a certain way, all right? That king will reach safety through the dark squares of the position. The rooks are going to try to get in. He's going to try to win both of these and harass the black king, and that is exactly what he does, all right? He slowly builds up an advantage here, kicks out the bishop, and bishop h6, and look at this. I mean, black is in bad shape here, right? The white rooks are paralyzing down the f, down the e lines. The white king is much safer than the black king. The black king is just barely gasping for air here, and Magnus right here played the move h4 and said, all right, now I'm going to win this game. Literally. He said it out loud. He said, all right, now I'm going to win. All right? He plays rook e5 attacking the c5 pawn. Rook c7, and Anish doesn't really know what to do. He's got a fortress, but he can't really make any progress. Here comes the white king, and the white king defends the centralized rook just in time. All right? We have a trade. The king continues his journey forward. But in this position, as he improved to the maximum ability, Magnus Carlsen lost on time. And Anish Giri won the game. That's blitz. Folks, that's blitz. I wish we were, I wish this was a classical game of chess. It was epic, all right? Magnus played a completely absurd opening with a3, b4. Anish defended solidly. We had completely insane head-spinning complications with a rook hanging like half the game, a beautiful dynamite strike of d4, which apparently was winning on the spot. Both players trading insane tactical complications, only for one of them to get the position that he likes to grind down opponents in and end it with a legendary king walk to the opposite side of the board. But his flag drops, his time runs out, and Anish Giri wins game number 1. Which takes me to game number 2. They switch colors as is customary. You want to get a game with white each, and then maybe we can go along our way. e4, c6. Magnus, make me proud. He's playing the Carlsen, my favorite opening. He just played knight a6 on move. Look, what? What? There's children watching. Literally this time. I like to make that joke. There's kids watching. So he plays kind of the coffee shop Carlsen. He plays the slightly obscure Carlsen, the knight a6, knight c7 Carlsen, if you will. And what does what does black want to do now that the knight is on c7? Well, he wants to play bishop g4, right? That's always an idea. Then e6. Then attack the center with c5. And the good thing about where the knight is on c7 is that the bishop can never get to b5, and that becomes relevant a little bit later, right? As you see kind of Magnus here implementing the game plan of playing the move c5, and the idea will be to play knight c6. And if white waits too long, you know, black is actually going to get a very reasonable position. Black will play c4, black will play b5, a5, b4, actually get very, very quick queenside counterplay. Which is why Anish says, you know what, you're giving me a free pawn, I'm going to take it. Nobody in your position right now is equipped to win back the pawns. Now, which pawn should Anish defend? Should he defend this pawn or this pawn? I have a suggestion. Why doesn't he defend both by playing g4 and then bishop to e3 or b4? Why doesn't he just guard both? Stop, just don't lose one of the pawns. Instead of that, Anish gives away the center pawn. He didn't have to do that, but chess is a lot easier when you sit, you know, here rather when you're playing a 2 or 3 minute game live at the park. Right? So bishop f3, queen f3, and we have a big exchange. So now white is no longer up a pawn, and black has all the benefits of the typical Caro Kann kind of style counterplay against the queen side here with a pawn break. Magnus could, of course, play bishop e7 and castles, but instead he creates the pawn break right away, and Anish damages his own structure. Voluntarily, all right? We have bishop e7, knight d2, castles, castles, and now Magnus is like, yo, that pawn is kind of weak. And if I can get my knight here, and add a little bit more pressure, I think I'm just going to win it. Why don't I play this nice move? Queen c8. Ooh, with the intention to play knight to a6, defended now. And now we have 2 more things attacking, and that's exactly what he does. That pawn is dead. That pawn's dead. All right, that's not, and it falls. And when the dust settles, Magnus is simply a pawn up. He's got 5 of them versus 4 for white. Now, is this game completely over? No, but yeah, no. Why is this game not completely over? Because that's black's extra pawn, right? Now, when things simplify, knight and 3 versus bishop and 4 is probably a draw. Rook and 3 versus rook and 4 is probably a draw. 2 rooks and 3, 2 rooks and 4, yeah, probably a draw. You know what I mean? Like rook and bishop, rook, knight. So at the end of the day, white still has enough drawing chances. And in low time formats, white has a knight, and knights are super tricky. So knights can jump all over the board, you know? And that's exactly what's about to happen here. Here come the kings, right? The kings want to get involved in endgames. The kings are these kinds of pieces that they only feel powerful when there's no threat to them around. There's one of those bozos. Right now, the kings are walking to the middle of the board. Here comes the knight, king e7, right? And we have knight takes b6 as a possibility here. So we have this, you know, we have maybe knight d5, little king deflection here. To try to like weaken the structure. But the problem is that white is constantly threatening moves like rook c7. That rook is extremely passive. So knight c4, king e7, and at this point Magnus realized that he might have to let in the rook because otherwise Anish will go a5 and there's going to be no real way to prevent the white rook from invading. So we have bishop d4. Here comes white's rook. King d3, but now the king is repelled completely. And it looks like Magnus is kind of getting back into the game. But remember a couple of moves ago I told you that knights were tricky? Well, rook c5, and Magnus Carlsen has made a very fatal mistake. The white knight can now jump to e5. You see, a move ago, it could not. The white knight could not go to e5 because it would simply be captured. But by putting his rook on c5 and not in the defense of his other rook, the bishop can no longer take. This can no longer happen because rook f7 is mate. It's just mate on the board. So knight e5, and Magnus is like, oh my goodness, how did I blunder that? Right? He's like, you know, but he looks at the clock and he goes, oh, Anish doesn't have a lot of time in his head. And then he goes, I'm going to win on time. Because Anish obviously is lower on time than him. So what does Magnus do? Sacrifices his rook for the knight. Pawn takes, bishop takes, rook f1, king g6, rook takes f7. This pawn is hanging. This pawn is going to promote. Black has a pretty decent bit of counterplay on this side, potentially picking off a pawn and then promoting something himself. But rather than narrating you through the craziness of what's about to happen, let me just show you what happens.
I can't believe I blundered that one.
Yeah, I was waiting for this one.
Oh my god.
Okay, I was waiting for this one. It's good for my YouTube channel. Thumbnail guy, think about it already.
Oh, I have to play. I don't even see where my pieces are. Time.
So I don't know how the heck the position jumped to that final cut. Obviously, there was a little bit of a lag, but Anish Giri won 2-0, even though Magnus promised that he was going to beat him on time, which was kind of funny. So that's what happens when two top GMs sit down and play a little bit of blitz. I hope you enjoyed the video. And listen, if we see any more footage live from Spain, you already know I'm going to be turning it into some good YouTube content for all of you. So stay tuned for that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Hopefully we have another fun one. Get out of here.